For Greg Katz, this is Erik McKinney, and we are talking USC's spring game. In this video, we're going to hit the offense. But I guess, Greg, before we get into that, let's just talk the spring game in general. This was a different look than what we've had the past few years under Clay Helton. What was your thoughts? This was a complete four-quarter game, two teams, and just kind of let it go. I thought it was an interesting look this year.
I liked it. I really did like it because it was like a game. They even had the helmet decals on, which usually they save for the fall. The quarterbacks didn't wear yellow shirts, the "Please Don't Hit Me" shirts, and they're lucky that the defense was as disciplined as it was. Otherwise, I think there'd have been 8 or 9 sacks in there. But that being said, I thought it was very well thought out. I think it was more about individuals than it was basically units, which is okay for quarterbacks and running backs, tight ends. Maybe not quite so good if you're trying to evaluate an offensive line, but we'll get to that. But all in all, I like the idea of 12-minute quarters and then the final quarter running time. My concern is if you were watching on TV, were they going to suddenly say, okay, 2 hours is up and the thing is still going on, right? But they had time at the end where they could, show highlights and everything. I thought it was well done personally, and I'm a pretty critical person when it comes to that stuff.
And Clay Helton said afterward, and I do agree with him, it was a nice way to get kind of some fun involved while still keeping it sort of, intense and physical and splitting up the teams the way they did. You've got some bragging rights inside the positions now for the rest of spring. So again, I like the way that they went after it, and I like the way it unfolded here. And hopefully that's kind of the first of a lot of spring balls that look like that and sort of have that feeling. Spring games, I should say. But getting into the offense, let's start right at the quarterback. And you had, coming into spring, obviously the talk was going to be about that backup spot with Matt Fink not there anymore. But let's start with Keaton Slovis. Your thoughts kind of on what you saw from him in that spring game, because it is one of those things where you want to say, Keaton's going to be Keaton, but he's got to play well, and you need your quarterback, especially in this offense, to be the guy leading you forward. So your thoughts on how he played?
I thought Keaton at times looked like the great freshman quarterback, dropping passes into narrow windows. And then he looked somewhat like the sophomore quarterback at times when he opened up with an interception. So, excuse me, I thought we saw the best and the not so good, shall we say. Though that's not to say I thought he was bad at all, not at all. He didn't play long enough to get it into any sort of rhythm. And for his sake, he didn't get sacked. I mean, he probably could have gotten sacked. But, I think, you already know what he can do. It's the question is, who is he as a junior? And we won't find out until the fall.
Yeah, I thought it was one of those things that answers some questions that you had about last year. I think he still looks good. There's still some throws, the interception early, it was, can he get it out there farther? And you want to see that a little bit more of him kind of driving it out there with authority and putting it out. But he had, the long throw to Drake London. And then there's a few throws where you have a lot of confidence in him. But staying at that position, I'm going to kind of open it up to you, the rest of them. What jumped out to you about the quarterback position with Keaton Slovis out of the conversation?
Well, of the three, and the one who played the least, but was pretty effective, was Mo Hassan, the grad transfer. I mean, he dumped one in there to Brew McCoy, which was a real nice toss. But now, of course, just kind of as a side note here, we don't know his status after a knee injury. I mean, this really opens it up to speculation because if for some reason it's a serious knee injury and we don't know, it looked like a non-contact injury, but it opened up the Jackson Dart, Miller Moss. Okay, guys, here's your shot, especially if Hassan can't come back. I thought Dart had the it factor. I thought at times he was really good. I mean, at the end, he threw a beautiful toss, a one-handed catch by Michael Jackson III. But then again, he threw an interception. He looks like somebody who's got it all, but tends to be a little overconfident that he can throw into windows that he's never seen close so quickly. And that, the interception was kind of like, you're a freshman, and I also thought that there was times that he didn't really square his body up, square his shoulders up. He kind of like almost looked like he was side arming it or flipping it. And maybe that's what he got away with in high school. I don't think you can do that at this level.
I think the thing with Jackson Dart, you've made the comparison. I think it's easy to make the comparison now that you see him in that SC uniform to Sam Darnold with the running ability and the arm and all of that. And Sam turned it over a little bit when he was at USC too, and trying to make those plays. I think Jackson Dart has had a few plays this spring where, hold on a second, that worked. That worked last fall, right? In high school, I was just fine doing that. And you learn and you mature, but you can't take away. There were a few throws in there, a few plays where it's wow. You see something out of that arm. He put the ball into some really tight windows and let his receivers go make some plays. I thought it was overall a positive from him. Right? You shake your head at the interception a little bit. Okay, we can't do that. The guy's a true freshman. That's going to happen. But in terms of kind of the zip that he has on the ball and what he can do, boy, that ceiling it looks awfully high for him. And I don't want to discredit Miller Moss. I mean, not that we need to talk about each individual quarterback, but he's another guy who has kind of accredited himself well. I think that he's also had some kind of early enrollee true freshman mistakes where he's learning the speed of the game and trying to get involved. But I don't think that he had his best effort on Saturday, but like Clay Helton said, and again, I agree with, I don't think the moment has been too big for these guys. I think they're going to be just fine. And I think that is, maybe just the very beginning, the very first time we see these two go head to head, potentially, for months, if not years, if they both stick around and kind of battle there.
One thing about Miller Moss to keep in mind, remember that Jackson Dart played a season up in Utah his senior year. Miller Moss hasn't been on the field in a real game like situation other than maybe these spring practices because he didn't have a senior year. So he's got maybe a little catching up to do in some ways. I don't think he got as big an opportunity maybe on Saturday as the others did. I wouldn't count him out at all because the true test is it's not what you do in batting practice. It's what you do when you really come to the plate in a game with a real live pitcher. And we'll see what happens when there's, as Clay Helton likes to say, real live bullets, flying around in places like South Bend, Indiana. That's where you're going to see the mental part of the game. And I don't think we know right now the mental part of the game of any of the quarterbacks. I mean, even Slovis has to fight it, to keep concentrating.
And it'll be interesting these next 6 practices for USC because again, coming into the spring, Helton said with that spring game being there closer to the middle than the end of it, those last 6 practices are going to be kind of focused turning to a lot of these young guys. So these two young quarterbacks, they could, step up front and center and get, maybe not a bulk of the reps the rest of the way, but they could again kind of step into that spotlight and take over at quarterback the rest of spring if you really are looking at a lot of the younger guys.
Yeah,
Flipping to running back.
We don't know what's going to happen with Hassan. If he's actually out for like you said, we're going to see a lot of those guys because they are the backup. That there's no arguing about that.
Yeah. Running backs in the spring game, I think they got, more work than maybe people anticipated coming in. Obviously, this offense is still going to throw the ball a ton, but the running backs got involved and there were, 4 scholarship guys and you saw some Matt Colombo at the end, the walk-on, who's another guy that's going to give you, everything he's got whenever he can get out there in the Coliseum and get the ball. But I'm just going to open up to you. What jumped out at you from that running back spot?
What jumped out to me is these guys are really good running backs. There's nothing wrong with them. If they can't get through holes, it's not really their fault because there isn't any. But what they ran behind was a diluted offensive line, a mix match of defense, and they had just enough holes to remind you that if given an opportunity, whether it's by actually taking a handoff or catching the ball out of the backfield. They are talented. They're not going to be the reason that SC comes in last in rushing, and they're not going to be the reason why if they don't get enough touches. That's a discussion for another time. But I will tell you this: uh, I was really impressed with Keonta Ingram. How could you not be on that one run? Basically, sometimes there's a run that says, "Here's everything you need to know about this guy." And you know what? He's got a fire under him. I thought Stephen Carr ran really well, which wasn't shocking to me because he obviously wants to make a statement, if not for his maybe final year at SC, but for NFL evaluation. I thought that, of course, Pavai Malapai looked like he always does. He runs hard. He can get yardage for you. So, when I look at it, I just go, they're not the problem. Okay. Give these guys an opportunity. They can produce if they're allowed to produce by their teammates and by play calling.
I thought Keonta Ingram was going to come into the spring game and just kind of take people's breaths away. I mean, that's kind of what we've seen flashes of him in the spring, and just come out and kind of own that position. He had that catch and run early that, again, like you said, it shows everything he can do, right? He can get out, he can catch the ball, he can turn upfield, he can uh, get away from a guy, he can run through a guy, he can cut back, he's got vision, he's got speed, all of it, the whole package, right? And so you see that and you think early on, okay, that's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to run away, potentially run away with this spot, in the spring game. Then Stephen Carr shows up and he reminds you of what he can do when he's playing with that sort of attitude and that confidence level. And he had a whole drive kind of to himself, a long run, and then he goes out and catches a pass, picks up a third down conversion, and then goes in for a short touchdown run. Like you said, Vavai Malapai, he reminds you, hey, I'm still here, and this is what I could do. And then you see some flashes of Brandon Campbell. Yeah, it's a good running back group. I mean, it is a good room. Quincy Jounty, we didn't mention there, and he's a guy that can give you some carries if you need them. But uh, what I'll say coming away from this is I expected Keonta Ingram to do something like that. I didn't necessarily expect Stephen Carr to have that kind of performance. So if you have those guys and Vavai in there too, if you have them pushing each other kind of to that level, like you said, you got to find a way to get them the ball. You got to find a way to hand it off to them, or get them involved in more ways than just, hey, one out of every 7 plays, we'll try to get you involved. I think that was kind of what comes out of here. Again, you're not getting ready for the season right now or a game right now, but that was a big reminder from that group of what they can do and how they maybe should fit into this offense.
Well, I think there's one thing that we need to address, and that is the fact that it's on record now that Mike Jinks says we want a lead running back and we want one backup. So if you look at the 4 guys, 2 guys are not going to be in that mix, so to speak. So the question will become is which 2 would you pick? And I think right now it's too early to tell. But what we do know is they're all good. Okay, they're all good. One might be better than the other, but the others are all good. Good enough. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I thought overall a good showing from the running backs there. Another good showing, a position that you kind of have come to expect good showings at USC, and that's wide receiver. I'll start Drake London. It's 7 catches, 139 yards, and 2, really impressive catches. The one on the sideline and the one deep down the field. He's ready to go. I'm good. Go to the sideline. Get ready for San Jose State. That's all I need to see from Drake London. But there were some other guys that stepped up.
Yeah, there's some other guys, but let me touch on Drake for a second. I think he is the most impactful receiver at SC since Mike Williams. Mike Williams didn't stay all that long either. Remember, he left USC early and then kind of took a facial through the court system. But if you remember Mike Williams as a freshman, he was really good. Then as a sophomore, he was just absolutely untouchable. And I see the same traits, the same size in Drake London. I think he's going to get bigger. I think he's going to dominate. look, you could double team him and he's just going to out jump everybody. So you just throw it up in the air and you get it reasonably within a spot. I thought that aside from Drake, I thought that Michael Jackson the third, he's the kind of guy that you keep knowing he's in the room, and you keep going, this guy might be pretty good. And then you do some research on him and you see how driven he is to be good and the things that he does to get himself in shape. And you go, well, this guy's got an attitude that maybe is not, because he played in Las Vegas, maybe not as well known in some circles because he played out in the desert there. But I'll tell you what, this guy is a baller. He can play. You saw that catch that he made, and he's done it before already in practice. There's a couple of moments that I'm sure some people have seen on Twitter and something other little highlights where you see this guy and you have to really say to yourself, I cannot think of him as a freshman. I got to think of him as a talent. And that's why I think he's going to be in the mix bigger and bigger early in the season. And who knows what happens in the middle to the end.
It's interesting you say don't think of him as a freshman, because he reminds me of Keaton Slovis in that way, where I know that when we were out there, um, Keaton Slovis is early enrollee freshman spring, and you're watching him, and he doesn't come in as this big, 4 or 5 star guy, and so you expect, okay, he'll come in, he'll sit behind everybody, and we'll think about him later. And then you start thinking like, hey, if the quarterbacks came out and they weren't wearing their jerseys that day and they didn't have numbers on, it would be tough to pick who the true freshman was, because that he's not playing like that. Michael Jackson is that way. If the receivers came out without their jerseys on and you couldn't tell them apart by numbers, Michael Jackson looks like a third year returning starter when he goes. He is buttoned up. He is professional in the way he kind of handles his business, the way he runs routes, the way he goes through practice, and he's consistent. And that's the biggest question mark, I think, for true freshmen coming in is how are they play in and play out every single snap. And he brings it. And yeah, at this point, that wide receiver room, when it's fully healthy, is talented. But I don't know at this, we're early in spring still. You still got a long way to go. But at this point, I don't know how you keep him off the field. Maybe he's not a starter, but he's got to be in the rotation, I think, after what he did on Saturday. And that wasn't just one of those things where all of a sudden everybody's talking about him because he did it in the televised practice and he hadn't been doing it up until that point. That was one of those things where when you've been watching spring all the way through and he does that, you just go, yeah, that's what, welcome to the show of what he's been able to do. And so that I'm glad you brought him up, because he's the guy that's jumped out, and I think there is a lot of talent there. He's a guy I'm really interested to watch and see how he progresses, how much better he can get over the summer and into that fall season.
Well, unfortunately, Gary Bryant pulled a hamstring a little bit. Otherwise, I think he would have seen more action. I think he's really good too. And then we tend to forget about Brew McCoy, who's a stud of studs, so to speak. And I think because the air raid offense, one of the big positives of it is that it gives you enough receivers on the field that you can rotate. The question will be is, will they rotate? We've heard they're going to rotate before, and the same guys stay on the field forever and a day. But these guys are so talented that, when they go to 4 wide receiver sets and stuff, they won't have a problem filling shoes for talent. That I can assure you.
That the point about kind of rotating in and out is interesting, because Graham Harrell hadn't run this offense with athletes like he has at USC. And so when you're loaded at the wide receiver position, when you're waiting for guys to kind of pat their heads and go to the sideline and take themselves out, you're not going to get that from these kind of guys. When it's a Michael Pittman and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Drake London and guys like that, they're going to go the whole game. I mean, they're going to do that. And so it's important to be, I think, one of those top 2, top 3, top 4 guys. And you mentioned there's a lot of those guys. Kyle Ford we haven't seen in contact situations this spring, but he's hopefully going to be ready to go in the fall. And then you add a couple more true freshmen coming in. So again, like we said with the running back position, there are going to be some options here. John Jackson the third had a couple catches, and he's a guy that I think gets forgotten a little bit, but has had a really good spring. And so, yeah, I mean, you talk about London and Gary Bryant, and we didn't mention KD Nixon, who's a guy who came on pretty strong, early in the spring, and gives you that kind of veteran experience there as a slot option. So the plays we saw from these guys backed up what they had done so far in the spring, and I think it's a really talented group. And Keaton Slovis is going to be lucky again to throw, I think, to these guys come fall.
Well, I think that it's going to be a real challenge for Graham Harrell to decide, along with Kerry Colbert, the wide receiver coach, because these guys are all so talented that how are we going to get it so people aren't unhappy? And I hate to say it, but they're going to pass that transfer rule with freshmen immediately, or excuse me, players transferring get immediately eligible, not only nationally, like if I want to go from here to, let's just say, Michigan, I'm immediately eligible. It's going to, the Pac-12 has already said if they pass this, they're going to pass it that you could go within the conference. In other words, I could go from Oregon to USC and be immediately eligible, a one-time deal. And you're going to have to keep players happy, because if they think, well, wait a minute, you're not playing me when I am as talented as the people I'm competing against, and then there's going to be the little voices in the background that go, it could hurt your NFL career. You need to be exposed. You need to be able to show what you can do. So it's going to be a real juggling act. It'll be very interesting to watch how the coaching staff deals with it.
Yeah, let's talk tight ends for a little bit. It's not a spot that got a ton of receptions, but I think, maybe some interesting things there. It's a position that has been so, I don't know what the word, confusing, I guess. The way the coaches talk about the tight end position, it's one of the most important positions on the roster. The way they talk about wanting to load up there and have these different kinds of bodies and being able to do stuff, and then you kind of look at the end of the season or at the end of the spring game and how many balls went to the tight end, and it just doesn't back that up. Now, the tight ends can affect the game in far more ways than just catching the ball. And I think we saw a couple of those options at the spring game there.
Well, I think that we're so browbeaten with we're going to use the tight ends, and then we never use the tight ends. We're going to throw to the tight ends, and we rarely throw to the tight ends. And that we heard from Graham Harrell, I use the tight ends, and everybody talks about using the tight ends, but for many people who watch the games and watch them intently are going, but you don't. It's a credibility issue. Now I'll say this with Kromenoke, he knows how to block. He knows how to be a reliable pass receiver. So he's capable. I thought the guy that really stood out to me for a couple of reasons was Mccree, the true freshman out of Texas. I thought he is a tremendous athlete who can catch the ball. And the thing that really stood out to me is he can take a hit. I mean, Raylan Goforth came out like a heat-seeking missile and just drilled him in the face mask. I mean, I was going, well, if this guy can get up from this, I'm impressed. And he did. He popped right up. And that's the thing that you don't know about true freshmen, that when a 20-year-old or 21-year-old linebacker gets a bead on you, it's like watching a Top Gun movie with Tom Cruise. I mean, he just laid the wood, and Mccree got up, and he had a couple other catches that were good catches. So he's not backing down. The stage isn't too bright for him. And you know what? He's only going to get bigger and fill out. So I think their SC's in good shape with their tight ends when they're all healthy. Mm-hmm. Now, the question is, are they going to use them? That's something they have to prove to those of us that monitor such things.
Yeah, and without Jude Wolf, without Ethan Ray, during that spring game, and so that's two options, off the table. Josh Follow was back and running around in there, but I think, like you said, Lake Mccree, and then coming this summer is Michael Trigg, and those two guys become immediately interesting, I think, in that room, in that tight end room, even though they're both young. You've got Eric Romanhope back for another year, and you know what he can bring. It's one of those things where, yeah, you've got the options, right? And so that I think that's what kind of Saturday proved. You've got another one in Lake McCree. We've seen, the other guys before. It's still kind of a question mark on how do they use them, and how do they fit into that offense going forward.
Well, I think you make a tremendous point about Mccree coming from Florida. This guy is a true athlete, multi-sport guy. And if you're one of these guys like McCree, you've got to show what you can do in the spring, because the last thing that a guy like Lake McCree wants to hear from a coach when obviously Trigg shows up and starts flashing that ability, his athleticism is, well, look at Lake, you had your shot in the spring, and this guy's playing at the same level that you're playing at, and you have all this spring, background, so you better up your game. So it's almost like right now, you better, if you're a tight end, not Chromano per se, but the other ones that are available, you better be ready to go, because I think Trigg is going to put a lot of pressure on, maybe not early, but they'll work him in there if he's, somebody, he could be a Drake London type of player, because he's athletic enough to play outside, not just a true tight end.
And McCree, like you said, so far, definitely one of those true freshmen that are kind of playing up to what we've talked about with this group, just being impressed, kind of beginning to end with these true freshmen. He has definitely shown up ready to go this spring. Go to the offensive line. That was kind of the biggest question mark coming into spring ball, which means the biggest question mark going into the spring game, where everybody could kind of see, okay, here we go. I thought it was interesting the way they went about it, right? It would have been very easy, I think, to roll out the first group that you've been playing all spring and the second group you've been playing all spring, leave those two together and have that be, your Cardinal offensive line and your Gold offensive line. That's not what happened. There was a draft, and a few starters ended up on one team, few starters ended up on the other team. We saw kind of some interesting mixing and matching. Cortland Ford was left tackle for one team. Andrew Voorhees, who had been playing left guard all spring, he went at left tackle for the other team. You had Liam Jimmons and Jalen McKenzie together on the right side of one of the teams. You had Justin Dedich and Brett Nealon together, kind of in the middle for one. So it was guys sort of in different places playing with different players, which is what we heard from the coaches coming into spring, that's what they were going to do a lot of. This was the first time we'd seen it. Up until the spring game, that first unit offensive line with Cortland Ford at left tackle and the rest of the returning starters, from what I'd been able to see during the media portions of practice, they took every first team snap. So this became something where, and I know you'll get into this too, I don't know how much you can take out of what we saw in the spring game because of all that shuffling and juggling up front.
Well, as a unit, I took nothing away from it, because the reality is they weren't coaching for a game next week. They weren't even coaching for a game the next 2 weeks, or training camp until after the first 2 weeks. So having the unit intact is really not the most important thing. What the important thing is to make sure that individual players fit in particular spots. In other words, can Voorhees move from left guard to left tackle and be effective? Can Justin Dedich move from center to left or right guard? And that was about real individual attention. That was for, let's go back at the film and see how you did individually. There was no unit stuff on it. I think what it does do, though, is it raises morale. I'm sure that after a couple of weeks of seeing the same starting offensive line, players need to have a carrot. They have to think that there's hope, just like anybody else. I hope that I can get a starting shot. But if they figure, I'm not getting a starting shot, then they go, what am I motivated by? Well, what you had here is a case where the bright lights went on, people in the stands, and they got a fairly good chance to play, which means they're enthusiastic. They can show what they did. And then I think, which really is a benefit of having the spring game in the middle like this, is you can teach off the film for 6 more practices and pay attention to the young players. Are we expecting any should we say, miracle with this offensive line? I don't know. Here's what I do know. I'm sure Clay McGuire, the first year coach from uh, Texas State, which is located in San Marcos, Texas, is not the same scrutiny that he got when he came to legendary USC in Los Angeles, California. Uh, so I'm sure that he's adjusting to scrutinizing. I mean, you can sit there and say, I won't pay attention to it for the first couple of practices, but every time you pick up a newspaper or hear a talk show or something, they're always saying this offensive line is it really going to be a challenge. And you can pick your words if you want: challenge, inadequate, whatever you want. I'm sure the players are just absolutely sick of hearing it. Okay. They're probably saying, you know what, I'm so tired of listening to that word, this or that and the other thing, you know, that they tune it out a little bit or they find it as inspiration. But whatever it is, I thought Saturday gave them all a chance to show where they could play, show their attitude, their intensity. And you know what? If I was when I was watching it, I didn't take anything away about, is the offensive line. If anything, I would take more from what I saw in the first 2 weeks of practice with the same group in there, saying they don't look a lot like they look just as what they looked like last year without Elijah Vera Tucker. And you can come to your own conclusions on that.
I'm with you at a lot of that. I really like that performance on Saturday from the two offensive lines and what's coming after it. That's when sort of the light bulb went on when Clay Helton's talking before about the spring game being located where it is and being able to teach off of that. I think that is where that became very important, specifically for the offensive line. It's going to be for all positions, but for me, specifically for the offensive line, for Clay McGuire to get that sort of film, that amount of film for all of those different individual players in that kind of environment, right? A true game-like environment, or as much as a game-like environment that you can make it uh, in April. So the fact that he can do that, and now you're not just like, okay, see you guys later, go off for the summer. You can spend the next 6 practices, the next 2 full weeks going over all that and getting these guys better to teach off of that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I do think that if you're gonna find some improvement, if you're gonna find ways to improve these guys, that I think is a good way to do it. And I don't think that Clay McGuire needed to go out there and throw the same two lineups out there. I think it's gonna be a positive overall for how they did it and how they mixed things up. Look, coming into Saturday, the offensive line wasn't gonna go out there and put together a dominant running game against that whatever the defensive line looked like coming out. It wasn't going to happen. And the expectation of, oh, the offensive or the result of, oh, the offensive line is terrible because they didn't run for 400 yards, that just wasn't going to happen. The offensive line is not this big bully offensive line, and the defensive line at USC has played pretty well this spring. Like this looks like it could be a pretty good group. The offensive line coming out and dominating on Saturday, for me, that was never part of the list of possibilities that we were going to see. So for me, it becomes, what does Clay McGuire get out of this? And like you said, it's the individual breakdowns of guys. You got to see a lot of Jonah Monheim, at right tackle. What does he look like compared to what Jalen McKenzie looked like going against some of those same defensive linemen? Because the defensive line was so limited by injury that you had a lot of the same defensive linemen coming in and out and playing for both teams. So I think that's where it becomes interesting. And again, I don't think we learned that the offensive line is better than we thought it was or worse than we thought it was as a group, because there was so much kind of playing with a guy for the first time potentially this spring. And so I think you've got some work to do on the offensive line. I think that's what we knew coming into spring. I think we knew that they were going to have work to do on the offensive line even when we get out of spring. When we get to the very end, that's going to be the spot, I think, where, hey, summer work comes, and that's where we've still got to grow the most for the program.
Well, I think that every player on that offensive line probably is feeling confident in the sense that, look, if I came in as a left tackle and I really all I want to do is play left tackle, then I'm just deciding that my options. I've just cut 4 other positions out of there. So I think at some point these players just go, I don't care where I play. I just want to play. I'll try center. I'll try left guard. I'll try right guard. I'll try right tackle. Because I tell you, at some point early in the season in 2021, if this offensive line continues to be what it has been, the coaches are going to say, okay, we've tried this all right. Do we see any measurable progress from the year before? If we don't, maybe we should go with players that maybe the light goes on in the game and somebody plays bigger than they show in practice. But I think they're all getting an opportunity to show that they can play different positions, and hopefully they take advantage of it.
And I think this is a spot, just like we mentioned with quarterback, where maybe Jackson Dart and Miller Moss kind of step forward and you take a real look at those young guys. The offensive line over the next 6 practices, maybe this is where you start to mix things up. And Saturday was kind of the impetus to start throwing different guys with the first team, or flipping, the offensive tackles to different sides, or flipping guards, or doing that sort of thing. And then that becomes the sort of starting point for, let's really take a look at where these guys fit best. And now, again, now that we've got some film, seeing how different pieces fit together, and how we can go forward there. So I think it's all kind of a work in progress. Again, the idea that, oh, the spring game is going to solve problems or give us, definitive answers for anything, that wasn't going to happen anywhere. That wasn't going to happen at any time in the spring. I think, when we talked about the running backs doing well, and quarterbacks throwing the ball, yeah, there were some sacks in there that potentially could have stopped drives, but there were some running lanes too, and some holes and things like that. I think overall there are things to build on with that group. Again, if you didn't go in thinking this is live or die, what does the offensive line look like? They're either going to be great or terrible. I think you've got kind of maybe some steps forward that we've seen this spring, and it's still early in that relationship, I think, between Clay McGuire and his offensive linemen, trying to get that sort of situation figured out as well.
Absolutely, because let's remember there was no spring ball last year, and they had a different offensive line coach, right, in Drevno. Now they have really their first time spring ball. It's really the first time that actually the entire coaching staff on the offensive side has the background of an air raid type of system. Drevno didn't, and he was trying to learn on the job because he was a pro, should we say, offensive line coach, and he was trying to learn what he was supposed to do. Now you got a guy like McGuire. He knows the ins and outs, the nuances. So to me, let's see what he can do with it. Let's see what he can do with it. Am I expecting, 5 guys along the line that are going to be first round draft picks in the NFL? I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think he deserves a chance to see what he can do. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think looking back at Saturday, some overall positive steps for the offense against some guys we expected to do well, of course, did well, and some guys really jumped up there. So again, 6 practices left in the spring, and then this is kind of that one taste of real football that you get during spring ball, and it's a long summer until fall. But again, looking back at the USC offensive performance from 2021 spring, the 2021 spring game.